Good evening, good evening. Good morning, everyone. We are on Parak Test Mishna Gimel, continuing with the discussion about the planted truma seeds and how to treat it. So the Mishnah continues, Parak Mishna Gimel, v'chayeves b'maiser b'maiser ani. Now this growth, you took the seeds of truma, you planted them, and now we say that which grows is truma. That's on a rabbinic level. According to Torah level, this is regular grain. And therefore, as regular grain, we say that one is obligated to separate maisris and maiser ani from it. Now, what that means is like this. That means that in essence, as we said, according to from the Torah's perspective, this is regular grain. And therefore, if this is regular grain, so then, although at the end of the day, the only one who can eat this grain is the Kohen, that's again midrabanan, that's according to rabbinic law. According to Torah law, it's regular grain. And therefore, you, the farmer, you who planted these kernels of truma, and the produce being yielded is going to be treated like truma, you also have to treat it like tevel. You got to treat it like regular grain. And therefore, it's obligated in maisris, in tithings, which includes separating truma from it. The word maisris, tithes, can include truma also, not just the tenth that goes to the Levi. So what it means is that from this grain, one, and the farmer has to separate trumas, to make a separation of truma to give to a Kohen. He has to separate maiser that goes to the Levi. Now, the Levi now is going to have grain that is truma. So he has to deal with that. There's nothing he can do with it other than other than sell it to a Kohen, because all these things we mentioned, one is allowed to sell to the Kohen because it's not real truma that it belongs automatically to the Kohanim. It's something that you have to treat as truma. Therefore, it's really yours, and you have no choice but to sell it to a Kohen for the value of truma, which is not much as we mentioned previously, and the money's yours for whatever you want to do with it. And that's what the Levi is going to have to do. Now, uvamaiser ani, you also, in the years that the tithing that goes to the poor, in the 6 years that precede the Shemitah, we have truma all 6 years. We have maiser rishon that goes to the Levi 6 years. The second maiser, during the second and third, is maiser sheni, sanctified. It's got to go to the base. It's got to go to eat in Yerushalayim, or redeemed onto money that is spent on food in Yerushalayim. And then the third that's going to be the second and the third, and the fourth and the fifth. While the third and the sixth, the second tithe and the second maiser is maiser that goes to the poor. So getting back to our grain that was grown from truma, one is obligated to give it to the poor. Now, which poor? The only poor who can actually eat it are the Kohanim. So the Mishnah says, Vani Yisrael v'ni Kohanim noitlim. Both poor who are non-Kohanim and poor Kohanim take it. The Kohanim are going to eat it. Vani Yisrael, but the poor who are non-Kohanim, they sell what's theirs to the Kohanim, b'dmei truma, for the value of truma, because its value is going to be as much as truma is, because it's going to be treated like truma. But the money belongs to them. Money belongs to them. Okay. So that's what Mishna is saying. You've got this grain that grew from the truma. You treat it, it can only be eaten by Kohanim, but other than that, you treat it like regular grain. You got to separate truma, you got to separate maiser, you got to separate maiser ani, and then it's going to go either, and it can go to any poor, whether it's to non-Kohanim poor, Kohanim poor, non-Kohanim poor, but sell it to Kohanim for the value of truma, and keep the money for themselves, use it for what they want. So there's 2 points that needs to be brought out here. Number one, there's no mention of maiser sheni. No mention of what happens to maiser sheni. It mentions maisrois, it mentions maiser ani, but we need, actually, let's talk, in maisris, in that word maiser ties, maiser sheni is included. But let's talk about maiser sheni. Now, maiser sheni, as we mentioned, the halacha is that maiser sheni has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Now, this maiser sheni you have right here has to be treated like truma. You can't eat it. Okay? You cannot eat this maiser sheni because it's truma. Okay, the only one who's going to be able to eat it is going to be a Kohen. So now, Let me teach you what it mentions here. Okay, the Meiser Sheni poses something of a problem. The grower cannot eat in Yerushalayim if he's not on Kohen because it's rabbinically treated as Truma. He cannot sell it to a Kohen because it is forbidden to sell Meiser Sheni. Therefore, he must give the Meiser Sheni to a Kohen to eat in Yerushalayim. So here's the point. Meiser Sheni becomes complicated because you, as the owner of the Meiser Sheni, typically you eat the Meiser Sheni, you can't. It's Truma. But we've said before that when you have this Gedule Truma, these things that grow from Truma, you can sell it to a Kohen. You can't eat it, but you can sell it to a Kohen because the sages who made it be treated like Truma just said treat it like Truma, that only Kohen can eat it. But it's still yours. And therefore you can sell it to a Kohen. But if it's Meiser Sheni, which not Torah, according to Torah law, it is Meiser Sheni, you can't sell it. So Meiser Sheni at the end is something that is going to be, so to speak, a loss. You won't be able to get anything from it. All you can do is give it to the Kohen, and the Kohen's going to have to eat it in Yerushalayim because it's Meiser Sheni. Okay, another point to be made here is the fact that in previous Mishnah, when we talked about the Aniyim collecting in the field what's left for them in this field of true produce, there was the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon that said that only the poor Kohanim can come and collect, because we're afraid that the poor who are not Kohanim, we're afraid that as they're collecting, they're going to be munching on it. And they're not allowed to do that because Truma. And therefore, Rabbi Tarfon said, no Kohanim at all. Only Kohanim, rather. No non-Kohanim. Here, when we talk about the Meiser Ani, here it says, the Meiser Ani, which again, the Ani can't eat because we treat it like Truma. We give it to him and he sells it to the Kohen. Rabbi Tarfon does an argument say, we shouldn't give it to the non-Kohen Ani because he may come to eat it. It doesn't say that here. Why is that? And the answer is because the concern of Rabbi Tarfon before was that the Aniyim, as they were working, as they were collecting, as they were cutting, that's when we were afraid they'd kind of forget and pop it in their mouth. But here, where they're not, so to speak, preoccupied by something else, that therefore, by habit, they would start doing something. That's not the situation here. You're giving him this Meiser Ani, but we know it's Truma. We know that's Truma. And therefore, he'll be careful not to eat it. He knows it's Truma. The same way he doesn't eat any Truma, he won't eat this Truma. So only in the previous Mishnah, when they were busy, either collecting or cutting the grain down, then we are afraid that while they're preoccupied with doing that, they'll forget themselves, and by habit, they'll start munching on it, and that's a problem if it's Truma. Okay, the Mishnah continues. Now, the Mishnah has to deal with the following issue, and that is, all right, so I grew this Truma, I planted these Truma seeds, the grain grew, all this has to be treated like Truma. Okay, now, what do you want to do? This person, at this point of time, you got to thresh it. You know, that's what you do with this thing. That's what you do with the grain. You got to thresh the grain. Somebody's got to thresh the grain. So the Mishnah now is going to discuss what is the way that one should thresh the grain. Now, what's the issue? The issue is the fact that typically grain was threshed by an animal dragging a threshing instrument over it. I always thought they just kind of stepped on it. But it seems like the animal would drag a threshing instrument over the grain. That's how it was done. Now, while the animal does that, the animal is going to want to eat the grain. And the Torah tells us that when an animal is threshing, is involved in threshing grain, you're not allowed to muzzle it. You got to let it eat. But here we have a problem because this is Truma. In the same way you can't eat it, your animal can't eat it. If you're a Kohen, it's not a problem. But if you're not a Kohen, then it's a problem. So the question is, how are you going to be able to thresh this grain and at the same time not transgress the prohibition of muzzling your animal while it's threshing it, while it's doing the threshing? So therefore the Mishnah says, the best way to go is to beat the grain with a stick. That's the best way to go. Don't involve the animal whatsoever. It's probably going to be a burdensome way of doing it, but that's the best way to do. Take a stick, beat it, rather than have the animal drag this threshing utensil over it, because then you run into a problem. V'hadash, but let's say somebody wants to thresh with an animal as usual. Ketzad Yasa, what should he do? The answer is like this. Toile kafifais v'tzavrei behema. You hang these baskets from the neck of the animal And you put into those baskets the same type of grain that's being threshed. It comes that he's not muzzling the animal, nor is he feeding it the truma. Meaning, by hanging these baskets around the animal, if the animal sees a barley and it wants to eat barley, so he's got these baskets of barley right in front of it, it can eat from that. And by doing that, you're not muzzling it because you're not refraining it from eating what it wants to eat. It wants to eat barley, it's going to eat barley. You're not, and it's not feeding it truma because it won't eat the truma from what's the basket. So initially we say don't involve the animal at all. But if you need to, at the end of the day, if you hang the baskets from the neck with the same type of grain that it's threshing, then already you'll solve the problem. You can get the threshing done by the animal dragging the instrument. If the animal wants to eat what it sees, it will have those baskets hanging around its neck so it can eat. If it sees the barley, the barley's right in front of it, it'll eat barley. And that's not called muzzling. You're allowing the animal to eat what it wants to eat. At the same time, you won't be feeding it the truma that you're not permitted to do. Okay, mitzvahs leisase shleilisnabis sheker b'shem Hashem, a prohibition against prophesizing falsely in the name of God. Shenema, as the pasuk states, but the prophet that presumes to speak a matter in my name that I did not command him to speak, that person is punished. Meaning, no man should say. This means that no man should say that words were spoken to him by God, and Hashem never said them. Meaning he wants to claim that he received prophecy from God. And it's not true. So any person who claims that he received prophecy from God, and it's not so, has this is the prohibition. When it transgresses this and prophesizes falsely, you actually perform a capital punishment of strangulation on him. Applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. Okay, so what I'm not sure about here is, the Chavetz Chaim explains that the issue is that what the Torah is forbidding us to do is forbidding any man to say the words of prophecy were delivered to him and it's not true. Does that mean that if he just says God spoke to me, that's the prohibition? Does he have to be actually delivering a message supposedly from God? It's not clear to me. It doesn't say. The wording of the Chavetz Chaim here the wording of the Sefer is, no person should say the words of prophecy were sent to him from God and God never did that. And I'm assuming that we're not talking about a person who perhaps has psychological problems and believes that God is speaking to him. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a person who's trying to make these false claims and, make himself appear like a prophet when he's not. And it's interesting also because, I don't know, for some reason, the Torah's words are achari, but the prophet that presumes. So I always thought that meant somebody who actually has established himself as a prophet and then falsely claims prophecy. That's what we're talking about. That's not what the Chavetz Chaim says. It says no man should say this. That means no man, even if you've never been established as a prophet, if you claim it, you are a Navi Sheker. You are a false prophet, even though you've never had any connection to prophecy beforehand. If a person claims prophecy and it's false, that's what his prohibition is. It applies in all places, at all times, both by men and by women. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.